CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Nigerian President Buhari promises reforms to the police department amid protests. Egypt hosts talks between rival Libyan factions seeking a new constitutional path. And the World Health Organization warns against herd immunity approach to tackling the coronavirus pandemic. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program, South Sudan now opts to introduce a new currency to control a severe cash crunch. And Ghana's Black Stars stormed to a 5-1 victory over Qatar in an international friendly tie. Let's begin the hour in Nigeria, where President Muhammadu Buhari has promised reforms in the police department. In a statement released on Monday, President Buhari said officers implicated in misconduct will face the law. This comes amid protests in Lagos City over alleged excessive use of force and extrajudicial killings by a police crack unit. The unit, called a Special Anti-Robbery Squad, or SARS, is also accused of extortion. Police officers have been battling demonstrations for days now, which has seen one protester die. The Special Anti-Robbery Squad was recently dissolved in an order by President Buhari, but some demonstrators say this is not enough.
The IG banned SARS yesterday like he has done 4 other times. Every year, I remember January last year, he tweeted that SARS has been disbanded. Another year, the tweeted SARS has been dissolved. Different words to mean disbanded and dissolved. This year, we're not falling for the same lies, okay? What we need is an executive order from the president stating that SARS has indeed been dissolved. We also need deadlines. We need a timeline when they will turn in their badges and their weapons and their uniforms. We also need what they will do to those officers who have killed people. Will they be prosecuted? Will they be tried? So those are the things we need to know.
As you can see, I'm speaking, man. I've been a victim of countless times, man. The extortion is out of this world. Now what I want the government to do is end SARS. We don't say reform, we don't say dissolve. I'm trying to dissolve SARS. Is this salt? Is this salt that I'm trying to dissolve it? Anything that can be dissolved can be resolved. So we say end the program, end SARS. Then we talk about reformation of police, Nigerian police force.
Let's now cross over to Nigeria and find out more from CGTN's Deji Badmus. He's
see concrete action, because there have been, promises like this have been made in the past and they were not seen through. So they want to see concrete action and they want to see concrete steps being taken. And that is the reason why you have so many of them still here. They're refusing to go home. And let me say this, look, what is going on right here now is taking place simultaneously in different parts of the city and different parts of the country. So, and they also say they want to see all those who have been arrested so far released. They are demanding for a reform of the police. They want the police to be better paid, so they want the salary of policemen in this country to be increased and all of that. So they say they will continue the protest until all of these demands are fully met, and that for them, it's not just about promises. They want to see concrete action.
Well, Deji, of course, the president has now promised police reforms, but just take us back a step backwards now and just tell us again the origins of this special anti-robbery squad. Why was it set up in the first place, and what was the aim of it? What was it supposed to do?
Now, the anti-robbery squad was essentially set up to tackle violent crimes in the country, especially armed robbery. Essentially, that's the reason why it was set up. It's a special police unit, but unfortunately, along the line, now the men posted to that unit started deviating from the course, and they veered into financial crimes. And at the end of the day, abuse is set in. So we had situations where officers of SARS would just stop young people on the road, arrest them, harass them just on the basis of their appearance alone. For instance, young people carrying dreadlocks, for instance, would often be stopped, harassed, and sometimes they are detained for days. And we've had cases, several cases of even killings of innocent persons. So that is the trigger of this. But you know, there's an immediate cost to this. The immediate cost to what we are having at the moment is that, well, a young person in the southern part of the country, in the south of the country, was actually shot by a SARS official, and that is what actually triggered this series of protests we've seen across the country. And Beatrice, you know, truth is that, look, when SARS was set up, the reason for why it was set up was quite very good, and to be candid, to some extent, they discharged their duties effectively, but unfortunately, along the line, abuses started putting in. And it is the culmination that we're seeing here today. It's the culmination we're seeing across the country. And, you know, there have been assurances in the past that actions would be taken, but then not much was done, and that's the reason why, despite that promise by the president, the protesters are refusing to back down.
All right, so Deji, we are seeing the protesters refusing to back down here. What should we expect in coming days? What should we expect both from the protesters and from government authorities?
Well, what I expect and what I think might happen is that, you know, the protests will definitely die down. There's no doubt about that. And we're beginning to see that. The number of people we saw in the first day of the protest is quite different now. Sorry, people are trying to cross now. The number of people we saw in the first day of the protest is different from us. So there's every likelihood it might die down. But then I think it will stop completely when we begin to see, or when the protesters now begin to see concrete action from the government. The good thing is that the government has said it is serious this time. It has set up a stakeholder, what it calls a committee now, committee comprising of some of the protest leaders and civil society groups. And in the coming days, we expect to see some concrete action. So when that happens, I think things will begin to die down. And then let's not forget also that schools are on strike, universities are on strike at the moment. Most of the protesters you see here are university students. So it's just understandable. I think also that when the strike is called off and, you know, universities resume, there's a likelihood that the protests would die down. But then no one had expected that this was going to last this long. And even the government didn't expect it, and I think that's the reason why the government is doing everything to ensure the protest ends.
All right, CGTN's Deji Badmus joining us there from Lagos with that update. Now, Egypt is hosting another round of talks between rival Libyan factions. The UN and the Egyptian Intelligence Bureau are leading the talks in the capital, Cairo, about drafting a new Libyan constitution. The discussions aim to settle the differences between the Eastern and Western-based politicians that have seen conflict rage on in Libya. CGTN's Adel Mahroui has more.
Representatives from the Libyan Western-based High Council of State and the Eastern Parliament are in Cairo for 3 days of talks. They're going to discuss the new formation of a new constitution for the divided nation. The meeting saw a rare participation from the chief of the Egyptian General Intelligence Bureau, Abbas Kamel.
For the chief of intelligence to give the opening speech of such a meeting shows how serious Egypt is to reaching a breakthrough in these talks. Cairo wants the constitutional track to produce a way out of the conflict and a guide to lead Libya through the next period of transition.
The Libyan Parliament and the State Council have both presented their visions for the new constitution. The document will be crucial in drafting the necessary legislation needed for an upcoming referendum and general elections. Both the UN and the Egyptian Intelligence Bureau have urged the Libyan rivals to settle their differences about that issue.
The Libyan parliament seeks to amend the 1951 constitution. It wants to change the governance system in that document from royalty to a form of republic system. The State Council believes that the draft constitution it recently formed should be offered for public voting in a referendum, despite the legal flaws in that draft.
Libyan delegations will be shown case studies of nations which have recently reformed their constitution. On the final day of the talks, Egypt will be presenting its experience after 2 constitutional referendums post the 2011 uprising. The UN-sponsored Cairo talks are opening room for direct dialogue between the two major political factions in Libya. If successful, Libyans will have crossed one of the biggest obstacles standing in their way for transition into general elections. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
South Africa's government has gazetted and placed before Parliament the Land Expropriation Without Compensation Bill. The planned legislation is part of the government's land reform efforts aimed at ending inequality in land ownership while improving access to services and opportunities. Land remains an emotive issue in South Africa. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
South Africa is moving ahead with the Land Without Expropriation Bill. It has now been gazetted and placed before Parliament, and the legislature has been tasked with turning the bill into law. The new bill makes provisions for expropriation without compensation. It features a new clause that deals with instances where it may be just and equitable to pay no compensation for expropriation of property in the public interest.
The legislation gives the state powers to be able to offer a price or offer to purchase to whoever they wish to appropriate. And when such does not succeed, expropriation therefore kicks in, which then deals with what we regard as fair compensation.
The minister says the existing Expropriation Act is inconsistent with the Constitution, and correcting this has been delayed unnecessarily.
It is important for us to appreciate that the purpose for the state to undertake this process, firstly, is to ensure that we align the 1975 legislation to our new constitution. One of the shortcomings, if one looks at the current legislation, it actually does not speak to expropriation for public interest, which talks to land reform. There are other areas that it has not touched, which are going to be strengthened by this new bill that has been put to Parliament by the Department of Public Works.
Land reform remains one of the most contentious and highly sensitive issues here in South Africa. Activists argue that the pace of land reform is very slow. More than 2 decades after the end of white minority rule, the majority of land is still owned by the whites. For over 2 decades now, government has sought to buy land from willing sellers and redistribute it to black people who were dispossessed of their land without much success. The government has stepped up its efforts to address the issue, but not everyone is happy.
We know that there had been varying views in society, some of the people contesting that this legislation is now going to effectively make those who are current landowners landless. Others have even gone abroad arguing about this legislation and what they think will have a negative impact in the farm sector. But also, on the other hand, those who would be the beneficiaries of this legislation felt that there's more powers that the law gives to the judiciary in order to adjudicate as opposed to the executive.
The government has pledged to conclude the process by the end of the year. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. WHO chief cautions against herd immunity approach to handling the coronavirus pandemic. And it's back to school for most students in Africa following easing of coronavirus restrictions in various countries.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent, to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Nigeria,
Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
The World Health Organization chief is speaking out against herd immunity, saying that suggestions it can end the pandemic are off the mark.
Never in the history of public health has herd immunity been used as a strategy for responding to an outbreak, let alone a pandemic. It's scientifically and ethically problematic. Allowing a dangerous virus that we don't fully understand to run free is simply unethical. It's not an option.
Dr. Tedros also said health officials are still learning about coronavirus immunity and whether it differs from one person to the next. He said the aim is to achieve herd immunity through vaccination, since infection rates are less than 10% in most countries and third-party rights applicable to their territory. The Tunisian Prime Minister Hichem Meshishi has announced that the government will implement measures to cushion enterprises and businesses from the impact of the curfew in parts of the North African country. Meshishi also says tough anti-epidemic measures such as the curfew will help curb the spread of the coronavirus and save lives. CGTN's Adnan Chauchi has the details.
Hichem Meshishi says the decision to impose a curfew in high-risk areas was made in consultation with the Scientific Committee at the Ministry of Health and the COVID-19 Task Force to combat coronavirus. Authorities have revealed that gatherings at night in restaurants, cafes or during ceremonies have become a major source of infections in Tunisia.
We have authorized the governors to take the necessary measures in their regions to implement the health protocols in order to curb the rate of infection. These decisions will have economic and social costs. We've set this Central Command Unit to monitor all anti-COVID-19 operations. All the ministries and sectors are represented. They can intervene instantly and solve any problem.
Authorities say that following the first wave of the pandemic, 30% of industrial companies have recorded a 30% decline in turnover, particularly those active in the textile and food processing sectors. This rate rises to 40% for service companies.
The night curfew has a direct negative impact on businesses as well as the activities of cafes and restaurants. The government will provide aid to limit the repercussions of the crisis. The economic activity cannot resume while the epidemiological situation is unstable. Tunisia must control the pandemic to initiate economic recovery.
The Secretary General of the Labour Union says that 65% of companies in the country expect a decline in turnover during the second wave of the pandemic.
Stopping infections and limiting the threat is a top priority. This is the role of government structures and health professionals. In the meantime, the state must care about a large number of enterprises which face difficulties. Tunisian companies have not recovered yet from the first wave. The second wave could be disastrous.
Prime Minister Hichem Meshishi says the 2021 state budget will allocate the health sector all the financial and human resources it needs. The Tunisian government aims to protect citizens from COVID-19 while ensuring the smooth running of services and the resumption of economic activity, unlike in the first wave of the pandemic, when the general lockdown paralyzed the country for over 2 months. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, schools are set to reopen in several African countries this week. In Kenya, where learning institutions were closed in March, they have partially reopened with final year candidates in both primary and high schools among those reporting first. The government has urged teachers to prepare the students for national examinations, which are set to be held in March of 2021. Uganda and Egypt have also announced resumption of schooling this week. Nigeria's federal government has directed that all schools should be reopened and must adhere to guidelines to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Schools across the West African nation were closed in March due to the rapid spread of COVID-19. CGTN's Deji Badmus with more details.
This is now what every student must do before being allowed to enter classrooms in virtually every school across the country. It's part of the mandatory requirements that learning institutions must comply with in line with the country's anti-COVID-19 guidelines. And inside the classroom, there's a whole new arrangement. Each of the desks here would normally hold 3 students, but that number has now been reduced to just 1, and not more than 20 students are allowed inside one classroom.
Right now, there's no extracurricular activity, so that there will be less close interaction amongst the students, and then of course we close by 1, so that we expect that by 1 o'clock all the students should go back home.
Formerly we used to have assembly before we go to our classes. Now, because of the social distancing of 18, there is nothing like that. We just go straight to the class and we teach, and the students learn.
To ensure physical distancing requirements are observed, classes are now being staggered. As for the students, many say they're happy to be back and are satisfied with the safety measures put in place.
I am very excited and happy. It's been 5 long months, and we have missed school a lot, so we are very excited to resume.
Some parents have not allowed their children back to school as they fear it might not be safe to do so. But the authorities have assured them that systems are in place to keep their children safe as they resume learning activities. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
To France now, where the cabinet is set to discuss further measures to fight the pandemic. Officials will not rule out clamping a curfew on cities, including Paris, where confirmed cases are surging. President Emmanuel Macron is expected to address the situation in a television interview on Wednesday. France has seen a spike in COVID-19 infections in the last 2 months. The number of coronavirus patients in intensive care exceeded 1,500 for the first time since May. The British government says it may have to impose even tighter restrictions if a second wave of the coronavirus accelerates in high-risk areas. This comes after the Prime Minister Boris Johnson introduced a new tiered system of restrictions for England on Monday. Pubs in some areas were shut down and field hospitals put on alert amid a spike in COVID-19 cases.
We must act to save lives, and the evidence shows that in changing our behaviour, in restricting transmission between us, our actions are saving lives. Left unchecked, each person with the virus will infect an average of between 2.7 and 3 others.
Well, Liverpool in England's northwest is the first city to be labelled very high risk under a new 3-tier control system. Pubs and bars must now close unless they can operate solely as a restaurant, and households are being told to avoid social interaction, including outdoors. Staff at 3 field hospitals across the country are preparing for a new wave of admissions. In Eastern Africa, the Ethiopian government says it will scale up its locust control measures. This is to get rid of the desert locust infestation that has affected parts of the country. The Ministry of Agriculture is set to get 5 planes this week for aerial spraying. So far, the Oromia, Amhara and Tigray regions are among the hardest hit areas. The exercise aims to prevent the pests from spreading further. The United Nations Food Agency has warned that northeastern Ethiopia faces a high risk alongside the country's food basket in the highlands. The body also predicts that the locust swarms could pose a problem up to March of 2021. Climate change has negatively affected food production across the world. A report by the Food and Agricultural Organization indicates that 43 of the 86 food insecure countries in the world are in Africa. To cope with climate change, some farmers in Kenya are adopting climate-smart technologies to boost food security. CGTN's Wanja Mungai met one of them and filed the following story.
23-year-old Martin Kirori Maina is a man on a mission. He's keen to promote healthy eating and food security through urban farming.
Urban farming, it's a kind of technology which entails bringing up the farming system in the urban cities. Because due to the challenge of food insecurity, we are coming up with strategies also to involve urban people to participate in farming regardless of the small space they are living in.
One of those strategies is to use spiral gardening. This is recommended because of its capacity to hold plenty of crops in a small space and for its affordability.
The cost of a spiral garden varies with size. We have three main sizes. The small one, which costs $20, and a medium one, $40, and we have the big size, which costs $80.
The garden is also eco-friendly in that it consumes very little water and uses biofertilizers. Martin developed his passion for farming as a teenager. He believed that by getting into the agricultural sector, he would help solve food security challenges that the continent faces. The Food Agricultural Organization says that half of the world's food insecure countries are in Africa. Armed with this knowledge, he joined the Kenya Institute of Organic Farming. Now he runs his consultancy firm, Kili Smart Organics.
To me, farming is fun because it entails a lot of things. It entails a lot of groups. You work with a lot of people. In farming, basically, I can say it is the basic of all things because you serve the people. Every day, everyone has to eat. You eat, everyone eats, and through that, I saw it also as an opportunity, even as a way, as a career, which can also bring something on my pocket also.
Our relationship started as, a client consultant kind of thing, and it transitioned into now what we have, Kili Smart Organics.
He also recommends the use of drip irrigation so as to reduce wastage of water. Martin has urged Kenyan farmers to use climate-smart technologies. Hydroponic technology is also becoming popular in Kenya, especially among urban farmers who are trying to adapt to the effects of climate change, a challenge the United Nations says is the biggest of the 21st century.
This is a hydroponics farming technology, which entails farming without soil. In short, soil is farming. Through these, we do various types of crops, such as salads, herbs, and vegetables in various maybe methods. This one is called an A structure.
Hydroponics also help to conserve water by recycling it and eliminating wastage. It is ideal for farmers with poor soils or those who have no access to huge tracts of land and would wish to control the environment for their crops.
There is an upper nutrient tank where the mixing is done and later the system is fed to these pipes direct to the plants.
Martin hopes that farmers in Africa will adopt these technologies. This, he says, will boost food security and proper nutrition across the continent. Wanja Mungai, CGTN, Nairobi.
And here's a quick reminder of our top headlines this hour. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has promised reforms in the police department. President Buhari said officers implicated in misconduct will face the law. This comes amid protests in Lagos City over alleged excessive use of force and extrajudicial killings by a police crack unit. Egypt is hosting another round of talks between rival Libyan factions. The UN and the Egyptian Intelligence Bureau are leading the talks in the capital, Cairo, about drafting a new Libyan constitution. The discussions aim to settle the differences between the eastern and western-based politicians that have seen conflict rage on in Libya. And the chief of the World Health Organization is speaking out against herd immunity, saying that suggestions it can end the pandemic are off the mark. Dr. Tedros also said health officials are still learning about coronavirus immunity and whether it differs from one person to the next. He said the aim is to achieve herd immunity through vaccination, since infection rates are less than 10% in most countries. And that's a look at your headlines. Well, let's now take a look at what's coming up next. Your business news, here's what's ahead. South Sudan opts to introduce new currency to control a severe cash crunch. And Chinese customs say the country's successful pandemic control efforts are behind its better-than-expected trade data.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time, it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Libya's National Oil Corporation has announced that the Libyan National Army affiliated forces have withdrawn from Al-Sharara oil field, the biggest in the country. The move followed Khalifa Haftar's announcement on the resumption of oil production. NOC has thanked the Egyptian government for mediating the 5+5 talks in Hurghada. An agreement has been reached on reforming security forces protecting the fields. Well, despite the ongoing coronavirus crisis, Egypt has recorded a substantial number of tourist arrivals. Approximately 300,000 tourists have visited the country since July, at a rate of 6,000 tourists a day until the end of August. Egypt resumed international travel on July the 1st after a 4-month suspension due to the pandemic. The North African nation has seen a 26% rise in searches regarding domestic tourism from the 2020 summer season and a 53% rise in searches for domestic flights. Tourism contributes 11.9% of the country's income. However, the travel industry is in dire need of an urgent and tailored support package to enable its survival amid the ongoing crisis. South Sudan's government says it will introduce a new currency in a bid to shore up its economy. The South Sudanese pound is depreciating rapidly and prices of commodities are skyrocketing in the market. As of Friday last week, the nation's currency plunged to 503 SSP to the US dollar on the parallel market.
South Sudan's currency, the pound, which was introduced when the country became independent, has depreciated by almost 100% this year alone. The government says the devaluation is due to a fall in global oil prices and the COVID-19 pandemic. South Sudan's economy depends on oil money to fund 98% of its budget. The government says many South Sudanese people are now keeping their money at home.
This is an advice to those who are hoarding money, South Sudanese money, in their houses, to hurry them to the banks. Put them into the banks so that you don't lose them. Put them into the banks as of now so that you avoid queuing up when the time comes for exchanging the currency.
keeping money at home has made it hard for the central bank to implement its monetary policy. The World Bank says a protracted war, corruption, and mismanagement has caused the current economic crisis in the oil-producing nation. South Sudan's central bank says it has run out of foreign exchange reserves and it therefore couldn't stop the pound's depreciating. It says it is putting up measures to salvage the economy, including seeking financial assistance from the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. But the World Bank says it wants to see financial transparency in the country as it continues engaging the government.
There are a number of areas that we have discussed. The first was the way to support the public financial reform agenda that the government has.
South Sudan's government has not yet disclosed a date when the new currency will be introduced. One economic analyst says more needs to be done to stabilize the economy.
Without improving the conflict situation and building infrastructure, particularly roads, and making these roads also safe to ensure goods and services move across the country, it will be difficult for us to address the economic situation. So the decision of the government to change the currency will not entirely address the crisis of the economy.
President Salva Kiir has so far replaced his finance minister and the head of the country's revenue authority in what he says is a reshuffle meant to improve the economy. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Nigeria's food security situation remains precarious, even as the lockdown restrictions continue to be eased. According to a report released by the country's Bureau of Statistics, August was one of the toughest months for Nigerian households, as more than two-thirds of the population experienced moderate or severe food insecurity. And as Kelechi Emekalam reports, the situation has been fueled by the coronavirus-related supply chain disruptions and the ongoing conflict between farmers and herders in parts of the country that has impacted food production.
It's becoming increasingly difficult for Nuhu Abdul Kadiri to fend for his family of 6. Despite the rising cost of food and other commodities, the civil servant's salary has remained static. The older children have been chipping in to help support the family, but the resources are still insufficient. Since the COVID-19 lockdown, the family has taken drastic measures to survive the hardship.
Those of us that are cooking 2 times, 3 times a day, we had to adjust it to cook only once a day. And we have neighbors that their main source of income, they have to go every day and source for their livelihood. Actually, they have been tied down. They cannot go out. The only option they have is to come closer to those of us that they assumed we keep little, and we have to share along with them. Actually, our children, I can say they are somehow malnourished.
I started this work during this lockdown, during this pandemic period, in order to support my family. Work helps me a lot because I've sold these pillows a lot.
Like Nuhu, millions of Nigerians are in a precarious situation spurred by the socio-economic effect of COVID-19. Many have suffered job losses and pay cuts. Basic needs like food is becoming far beyond the reach of the average Nigerian. The Bureau of Statistics report shows that out of 68% households facing food insecurity, 51% use loans to feed.
We have a scenario where the political instability in the northeast, in the northwest, which has extended to a great extent to the middle belt, is affecting farmers' ability to produce the food that we normally eat. And also where you have a situation where the currency is fast losing value, any food that is imported will also reflect the price, the cost of is being imported in terms of the naira vis-a-vis foreign currencies. So the implications are frightening. You have to relate it to crime. If able-bodied young men and women, old men cannot feed themselves, they will definitely have to do all it takes, whether legal or illegal, to put some food in their stomach.
Food inflation hit 16% in August 2020. To stem the tide of food insecurity and its unpleasant impact on the country, experts advise government to readjust the security architecture of the country to allow farmers safely return to their farms, as well as strengthen the food production value chain to curtail waste and boost production. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
China's customs data show the country imported and exported a record amount of goods in yuan-denominated terms in the third quarter. China's exports rose 10.2% in the third quarter from a year earlier to 5 trillion yuan. That's the first year-on-year quarterly rise since the pandemic. Imports rose 4.3% during that time. For the first 9 months of the year, exports climbed 1.8%, while imports dropped 0.6%. Customs authorities say the better-than-expected trade data are thanks to China's pandemic control and resumption of work. So what's the significance of the record-high third-quarter trade numbers, especially exports for China and the global economy? A question we put earlier to Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics.
This means that China's the export sector is really recovering. Finally, it's recovering, and it's so great that it's pulled the entire 3 quarters so far into positive territory. And with that, you can just do a very brief calculation. What it means is that I would guess that the third quarter GDP growth will be probably very close to 6%, because the export sector contributes to close to 20% of China's GDP, and with the 10% growth of that, I mean that's already a 2 percentage point increase there. So it just fundamentally says that China is coming back, the economy is coming back, people are spending money, businesses are buying things. And if you look at break down the exports numbers, it's not just the increases in these, medical equipment, PPEs, masks, and stuff like that. Actually, it's across the board. The electronic equipment, the mechanical equipment, they are all seeing, very significant growth. So I think, China's economy is coming back. That's for sure. And I think with a very good third quarter number, we're probably going to see a, close to 3% GDP growth for the whole year, which is exceptional. It's one of the only, major economies that are seeing positive growth this year.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. To stay with us.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Global leaders recently pledged to ensure that biodiversity loss is reversed in their countries. That promise comes at a time when a report by the World Wildlife Fund shows a massive decline in the number of animal species worldwide. In Kenya, the Mzima Springs, which are a natural water catchment area, are under threat from human encroachment. CGTN's Enoxi Collier has that story.
Within the dry Tsavo West National Park, there is a place where water has turned drylands into paradise, creating an oasis that teems with beauty. It is a diverse and astonishing wilderness with few, if any, places quite like it. A magical spring pool where Africa's iconic animals flourish. This is the lifeblood of the Tsavo East and West National Parks, and its name, Mzima Springs, is the Swahili equivalent of springs of life, full of hippos, crocodiles, fish, and clear water that captures the blue sky.
Mzima Spring, as you are aware, feeds Savo River. Savo River passes from Savo West to Savo East, then on its way to Ngarana River. Along the way, the own drive, the animals get water in that river, and also animals get water from Mzima Spring itself.
It's close to a year since significant rains watered the soils here. Most water points across the Savo ecosystem have begun to dry up, and wild animals are shifting bears. The dry season is almost hitting its peak, but in the middle of this, over 20,000 hectares of land lies an unlikely heaven for the wild. The incredible story of the freshwater dam starts 58 kilometers away at Chulu Hills. Rainwater in the hills that rise to 2,188 meters above the sea level percolates into underground reservoirs and undergoes natural filtration for years before permeating through subterranean channels. This water may spend close to 25 years under the volcanic lava rock before traveling for 50 kilometers and then get pumped from deep underground by a force that only Mother Nature can marshal.
Cool as it looks, this is the source of water that quenches the thirst of millions of people and thousands of plant and animal species.
One of the biggest springs here was rooted into a large underground pipe to flow with gravity down to provide drinking water for millions of people in the coastal city of Mombasa. But animal and plant species living around the Savo ecosystem and people downstream are facing danger. The source of water for the Mzima Springs, that is the Chulu Hills, are under attack from human activities. People clearing the forest cover for settlement and farming, and the Kenya Wildlife Service is warning that if that does not stop, thousands of wild animals and millions of people who depend on water pumped out from the Mzima Springs could die of thirst.
Without Mzima Springs, what it simply means, tourism in the coast dies, industrialization in the coast stops.
The warning comes at a time a report by the World Wildlife Fund has revealed that the destruction of nature has led to a 68% decline in animal species. Enoxikolia, CGTN, Savo National Park.
And let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's coming up. Ghana's Black Stars stormed to a 5-1 victory over Qatar in an international friendly tie.